Today's world of Fallout is quite a bit different from its earliest games. Once upon a time, however, a character helped connect them together, a unique man by the name of Harold. I'm Mark from Digital Dissection. I make Fallout videos, and today we're looking at 9 facts about the FEV mutant known as Harold, or Bob. It's kind of complicated. Harold was born in 2072, meaning that by the time the bombs fell, he was only 5 years old. Not much is known about Harold's life up to this point, but he remembers the sirens going off, signaling the beginning of the Great War before entering Vault 29. Initially, Vault 29 was only mentioned within the Fallout Bible, but it sheds some light potentially on Harold's background. From what we know about Vault 29, it uniquely only accepted residents who were under the age of 15. It would appear to be similar to Vault 75, and that parents and children were separated, except in this case they weren't harvested necessarily for their organs, as far as we know. Additionally, we can also postulate that the teenage residents likely came from affluent families, which we learn more about in Fallout 76. Trisha Miller, a Vault Tech University student, disclosed in a holotape that she didn't want to end up in Vault 29 after repeated attempts to become an overseer.
For God's sakes. At this rate, I'm gonna end up shipped out to the West Coast to work as a janitor in 29 with a bunch of obnoxious rich teenagers or something.
So it would appear that rich families could at least get their kids within this vault. We're not sure what happened to all the parents themselves, but according to the Fallout Bible, they were likely directed to other vaults. Vault 29 would serve as Harold's home for 13 years. But unlike some of Vault Tech's experiments, this one was designed to open in the year 2090. According to him, it was a relatively welcome occasion, as Vault 29 was overcrowded and faced food and water shortages. How he spent his time in Vault 29 is up to speculation, but he emerged with a strategy for the wasteland and quickly put his efforts into becoming a caravan trader. By this point in Fallout's history, survivalist communities had begun slowly popping up, as those on the surface who remain banded together. Seeing an opportunity to create repeat business, Harold formed a circuit between these settlements, which was constituting the area of New California. Within only a few years, Harold had begun to amass a great fortune, leading to a location that would greatly impact his fate and many others across the New World. By 2096, Harold had already long left behind his days as a vault dweller and fully transitioned to one of the most prosperous traders in New California. His once humble operation is now a fully established business, making Harold a caravan boss centralized out of the hub, a critical crossroads for the region. The location was relatively untouched during the Great War, and due to this, it became a popular destination for many travelers. From chems to building materials and various kinds of agriculture, the hub began in 2093 when a man named Angus settled upon an oasis in Southern California. Harold's emergence as a trader was well-timed, but even with this success, his caravans became targeted by attacks. While initially not consistent enough to be a major concern, it would seem that raiders and wastelanders took advantage of the security outfits Harold could afford to accompany with these caravans. By the early 2100s, however, the raiding parties would become a much more unique threat, that of a mutant variety. By May of 2102, Harold was at an impasse, as his caravans were consistently being attacked by mutant hordes.
Gangers got 'em. Scavengers attacking the caravans, and mutant son of a dog if they weren't springing up like rabbits with a mission. Had to have an army of guards with just to do a deal.
While he was able to afford reliable security for many years, he was finally angry enough to find the source of the mutants and put an end to their reign of terror. After settling in the hub, Harold would meet Richard Gray, a fellow vault dweller who once lived in Vault 8, but would be exiled for murder. Gray was originally named Richard Moreau, and upon finding the hub, changed his name. He would become a popular component of the hub as a doctor, leaving behind his violent past and becoming a good friend of Harold.
Brilliant guy. A doctor and philosopher. Long ago, he led the expedition where I got changed into a mutant.
Harold's respect for Gray would lead him to ask if he would join an expedition to wipe out the mutant threat, with Gray becoming the team's leader. The small team comprised of Gray, Harold, and several others determined to head northwest based on Gray's calculations, which would later prove accurate, as the majority of the attacks occurred in that direction, and would eventually lead them to a pre-war secret. the Mariposa military base. After a month-long journey, Harold and the search party discovered a site of pre-war importance, as the Mariposa military base was not only the source of mutants, but also where human testing was performed with the forced evolutionary virus. The site had been the centerpiece for West Tech's ongoing testing, and would be the cause of super mutants appearing across the entire Fallout universe. Unfortunately for Harold and the expeditionary team, they were soon to suffer heavy losses, due to the high-powered defense systems protecting the site. Robotics, mutants, and machinery awaited the group, and almost everyone died for the exception of Gray, Harold, and Mark. Mark would be sent back to the surface to hopefully enlist others to help, and then tell later what happened. But according to Harold, he was never seen again.
To this day, I don't know. He never made it back here, and, well, I couldn't face the wasteland again, so I never looked.
Gray and Harold would reach the innermost areas of the facility, but Gray would be knocked into a massive pool of FEV by a robot crane, and the same attack would leave Harold unconscious, alone, and facing changes that he would never recover from. Exposure to the forced evolutionary virus might have felt like the least of Harold's concerns, as he was left with many injuries, but managed to pull himself out of the military base. As he struggled to make his way back to the hub, he'd be discovered by traders who recognized him on June 27, 2102.
Well, I have no idea. Woke up in the wasteland, barely hanging on. Got lucky, and some traders I knew found me days later. Good thing, since I was already changing. They brought me here, and here I've been since.
Upon arrival, he could find no sign of Mark ever actually making it back, with the ordeal causing him to remain in the hub, as he greatly feared trying to even go back to look for Mark, as he barely escaped in the first place. His deeper concerns would be the transformation his body began to undergo, as he slowly succumbed to what looked like ghoulification, with his flesh slowly rotting and fully losing his right eye. Due to ghouls being largely treated as outcasts by society, it meant the loss of several aspects of Harold's burgeoning caravan business, including his clientele, later his employees, and any friends he had left. The drastic changes led Harold to leave the hub for its easternmost area called the Old Town, as he would live for decades amongst thieves and criminals, destitute and keeping to himself in a large abandoned building. He'd still be well known by the hub's citizens and the Old Town as a great storyteller, always willing to trade information for money. But by almost 90 years of age, he'd seek a new life by 2162, and have a noticeable addition to his head. By 2238, Harold wandered for quite some time, and was able to regain some relationships as a trader, but would arrive in the town of Gecko'd, a ghoul community, but he'd also receive a new friend, a sapling that began growing out of his head that he named Bob. It's unknown exactly how the sapling began growing, or if it was on Harold already and was transformed by the FEV, but more on that later. Gecko itself faced many unique problems, and Harold stepped in to help them with their nuclear reactor, of which he tried to fix, and would be later named foreman for the community. His past as a trader proved useful, as he would ensure that uranium from the Broken Hill settlement would continue to fuel the reactor itself, while simultaneously seeking to fix a leak in it that could potentially poison the entire area, including Vault City to the south of Gecko. Unfortunately, the politics of Gecko and seemingly endless social conflict between nearby settlements tested Harold's patience over time. And while he'd maintain his humor and ability as a storyteller, he'd leave Gecko shortly after the defeat of the Enclave, somewhere in the area after 2242. While Harold may have lived the majority of his life in the area of New California, he'd spend roughly the next decade heading east, making his way to the capital wasteland of Washington, D.C. By this point, it was roughly the 2250s, and the once small sapling of Bob had grown considerably, forcing Harold to take rest in the northern region outside of the D.C. metro. Unfortunately for Harold, this began a series of events that he'd soon regret. Harold's decision to rest allowed Bob to anchor itself to the ground, and upon waking, Harold realized he could no longer move. And while Bob may have once been a part of him, the opposite was now the case, as he was a part of Bob. Relying entirely on Bob's plant biology to gain nutrients and sustain life, he'd be discovered by a man who would later call himself Birch. And in time, Birch would create a cult of sorts called the Tree Minders. The group's responsibility became to take care of Harold, as his bizarre transformation brought vegetation and life to the area. and could potentially usher in an entirely new era of survival for humanity. Harold, however, is unsure of the role he wants to play in the entire scenario, especially after being rooted in the ground for several decades. While it's potentially up to players to decide his fate, it's pretty clear that Harold's journey ends here, as his organs are now deep within the earth, surrounded by roots and protected by the tree minders. He also now calls Bob Herbert at times. It's a bit of an odd existence. Harold's time within the Fallout universe is equal parts refreshing and sad, as his personality is always quite easy to like, and that's despite overcoming many unfortunate circumstances. In Bethesda's decision-making, however, after the Interplay era of the franchise, it would seem that Harold's ability to unite the series across its many entries is now over. What remains, however, are some interesting questions about the character, and why more about him hasn't been explained. In a franchise full of lore explanations, it remains up to debate exactly what Harold is, as he physically appears to be a ghoul, but his FEV mutation and the creation of Bob is a process that has not been seen anywhere else across the franchise. The idea of FEV impacting different species of animals and humans have been explored, but Harold and his friend Richard Gray, who becomes an FEV mutant fused with technology, still remain as two unique examples of the forced evolutionary virus behaving differently than they have in any other instance. Harold's impact on the entirety of the Fallout property may seem largely more of an Easter egg now, but there appears to be much more that can happen when humans and the forced evolutionary virus meet, and it leaves a major door open to possibilities as lore gets added on Amazon's TV series. For now, however, it appears that what we'll likely see of Harold is nothing more than a stray mention or a throwaway line of dialogue, unless he somehow figures out to escape being a literal tree. And with that, we've explored 9 facts about Fallout's Harold, the unique caravan boss turned FEV mutant. Did we miss any of your favorite facts about the character? Let us know in the comments. And for more content like this video, check out our full Fallout Stories playlist linked here. And until next time, pop culture nerds, keep on dissecting. This is Mark signing off.